I didn't quit in a blaze of glory. I didn't slam a laptop, flip a desk, or make some speech people would repeat in the break room. I left the way you leave a building you've been holding up with your shoulders, slow, careful, and with a weird kind of relief once the weight isn't yours anymore. It started with a retention bonus announcement on a random Tuesday, the kind of corporate good news that's really just fear wearing a suit. I worked overnight operations for a mid-sized logistics software company. Not glamorous, not tech. More like if a customer's shipment stopped moving at 2:17 a.m., my phone would light up and I'd be the one staring at logs, rerouting queues, calling vendors, and keeping the whole thing from becoming a headline. Day shift got credit. Nights got blamed. We had a little team, 5 of us rotating coverage. 2 were solid. 1 was new. 1 was a chronic busy person who was never actually available when things broke. And then there was Mark. Mark was the kind of coworker who made a point of sounding relaxed, always leaned back, always smiling like the job was easy, always saying things like, "Hey man, don't stress. Leadership loves us." While I was cleaning up messes he didn't even notice were happening. So when leadership called in all hands and said they were rolling out retention bonuses for key roles, I already knew how it would go. I'd seen enough appreciation to understand the math. Praise is free, panic is expensive. Our director, Aaron, did the usual warm voice. We're investing in our people. We want to reward commitment. We've identified critical contributors. Critical contributors. I actually laughed under my breath at that. I was running nights, covering holidays, training the new guy, and patching gaps in documentation that should have been written 2 years earlier. If critical meant anything, it meant if he leaves, we're in trouble. After the call, Aaron pinged people one by one to deliver amounts privately. That's how you avoid anyone comparing notes in real time. Mark got his first. He came back into the team chat with this fake humility. Guys, wow, didn't expect that. They really showed love. Then he DM'd me a screenshot like it was a lottery ticket. $28,000, not stock, not overtime. Cash bonus labeled retention incentive, paid next cycle if he signed an agreement to stay 12 months. He added, "Told you. They know who matters." My stomach did something quiet and unpleasant. Not jealousy exactly, more like recognition, because I already knew what mine would be. Aaron called me 10 minutes later, video on, big smile, rehearsed. "First, thank you. You've been such a stabilizing force on nights." I nodded, because I'm trained. You nod when people compliment you so they can get to the part where they take something away. "We're offering you a retention bonus, too. We're excited." She paused, like she expected applause. 5,000. For a second, I thought she misspoke. Like maybe she forgot a zero. I even waited for her to correct it, the way you wait for someone to realize they just said something insane out loud. She didn't. 5, she repeated, still smiling. "And it comes with the same 12-month agreement." I stared at her and felt this dull heat rise in my face. Not anger, not yet. More like embarrassment on her behalf. Like she'd just revealed what she thought I was worth and expected me to thank her for being honest. I said, "Okay," because I couldn't trust my voice to do anything else. Aaron's smile tightened a fraction. "I want you to know this reflects budget considerations, not your performance. You're extremely valued." Right. My value just had a price tag, and it was less than a used Honda. When the call ended, I sat there in my apartment office with the lights off, monitors glowing, listening to the building's HVAC click. My shift started in an hour. I should have been sleeping. Instead, I opened my personal spreadsheet, the one I used to track bills, and typed 5,000 in a cell. Then I typed 28,000 under it. I didn't do it to torture myself. I did it because I needed to see it in plain numbers. 7 days earlier, Mark had missed a critical alert. Because he stepped away. I'd been the one who caught it, escalated, and kept a client from timing out during a high-volume window. Aaron had thanked the team in a public email. Now I was being offered a gag bonus to handcuff myself for a year. And the worst part? Mark wasn't even the villain yet. He was just the loudest symptom. That night, right before midnight, the queue started backing up, slow at first, then ugly. A vendor endpoint was returning partial responses, and our system was choking on retrieves. Normally, we would divert traffic and throttle, but the runbook was outdated, and the last time I suggested updating it, Aaron told me to focus on execution, not process. My phone buzzed. Mark, of course. Hey bro, seeing some stuff? You got it? I looked at the graph rising like a tide. I looked at the alert list populating faster than I could clear it. Then I opened the retention agreement Aaron had emailed. 12 months. Immediate repayment if I left early. A clause about confidentiality of program details. Another clause about at-will employment remains in effect. They wanted me locked in, but they wanted themselves free. At 2:41 a.m., Aaron finally answered my escalation call, voice thick with sleep and irritation. Is this urgent? I watched the backlog cross the threshold where it would start impacting client SLAs, penalties, angry emails, calls to execs. Yes, I said, and my voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. At 2:58 a.m., she said, do whatever you have to do. Just fix it. At 3:00 a.m., I stood up, unplugged my headset, and took my badge off the lanyard like I was removing something that didn't belong to me anymore. And I walked out. I didn't sleep after that. Not because I was panicking, but because my brain finally stopped trying to justify things that never made sense in the first place. By noon the next day, my phone was vibrating like it had a pulse. Slack messages first, then texts, then a missed call from Aaron that she didn't follow up on. That told me everything. When managers are confident, they leave voicemails. When they're scared, they wait. I logged into my work email once, just to see the damage. Overnight tickets had stacked up. A client in Europe escalated to their VP. Another threatened service credits. And buried in my inbox was a calendar invite titled Quick Sync Ops Coverage. No agenda, no apology. That was when the irritation turned sharp. Because this wasn't sudden. It hadn't been a bad day or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern I'd been stepping around for years, telling myself it was temporary, that this is just how nights are. When I joined the company, nights were sold to me as a stepping stone. High visibility, Aaron said back then. You touch everything. What she didn't say was that you also absorb everything. Every mistake, every shortcut, every half-decision day shift didn't want to own. Metrics told the story if you knew where to look. Day coverage was measured on output, tickets closed, projects delivered. Night coverage was measured on absence, no outages, no noise, no questions. If nothing broke, leadership assumed nothing happened. So when Mark took credit for stability, it landed. He spoke in meetings. He summarized incidents I'd handled while he slept. He knew how to phrase things so they sounded strategic instead of reactive. And I let it happen because pushing back felt petty. Because I believed competence would eventually speak for itself. That was my mistake. I started pulling threads. Not angrily, methodically. I downloaded my own performance reviews, pulled ticket histories, cross-referenced incidents with on-call rotations. Every major save in the last year had a timestamp between midnight and 5 a.m., my initials somewhere in the chain. I also read the retention program fine print again. It wasn't really about retaining people like me, it was about retaining optics. The budget came from a discretionary pool Aaron controlled. Amounts weren't tied to output or seniority. They were tied to leadership perception, which meant who made them feel safe during the day. Mark made them feel safe. I made problems disappear in the dark. But that was just the beginning, because the more I looked, the clearer it got that the $5,000 wasn't just low, it was intentional. A test, cheap insurance. If I signed, I'd be locked into nights for another year with a paper trail that said I was satisfied. If I didn't sign, they could say they tried. That afternoon, HR finally emailed. Polite, neutral. We noticed you haven't acknowledged the retention agreement yet. Please let us know if you have questions. I did have questions. I just wasn't going to ask them out loud. I thought about Mark again, about how he'd said, "They know who matters." And for the first time, I realized he wasn't wrong, just incomplete. They knew who mattered to their image. At 6:30 p.m., Erin called again. This time I answered. She didn't waste time. "Last night was rough," she said, like she was describing weather. "We really need consistency right now." I said, "Then why did you make it conditional?" Silence, not long, but telling. "The bonus?" she said carefully. "Those decisions are complex." "No," I replied. "They're deliberate." Her tone shifted, not hostile, defensive. "I don't think this is productive." I almost laughed. Productive was the word they used when something benefited them. "I want nights off rotation," I said, "updated run books, and compensation aligned with scope. Otherwise, the agreement doesn't make sense." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not on the table right now," she said. "We need you focused." There it was. Need without respect. Dependence without acknowledgement. I hung up feeling oddly steady. Not angry. Just finished. That night, I didn't log in. I watched. Alerts triggered. Someone else tried to follow the run book and made it worse. A vendor was called too late. By midnight, leadership was looped in. At 1:12 a.m., Mark messaged me. "Hey man, you around? Stuff's kind of blowing up." I stared at the screen and felt something shift. A small, quiet realization that surprised me. That night, I stopped being the hero. Not because I wanted revenge, but because heroes don't get retention bonuses. They get used. And once I understood that, everything after became very simple. By the third night, the system wasn't just unstable, it was exposed. I could tell without logging in. When things really went wrong, the company's behavior changed first. Fewer Slack messages, more emails, the kind with too many people CC'd, and language that tried to sound calm while quietly assigning blame. At 9:47 p.m., an internal incident channel spun up. Someone added me, then immediately removed me. That told me they were arguing about whether I still counted. I did one thing that night, and only one. I forwarded myself a copy of my last 12 months of on-call summaries from my sent folder. No hacking, no sneaking, just documentation I already owned, sent to my personal email, while I still, technically, had access. Then I closed the laptop. Around midnight, my phone rang. Not Aaron this time. It was Greg, VP of Operations. I'd spoken to him exactly twice before, both times when things were already on fire. "Hey," he said, skipping pleasantries. "We're seeing cascading failures. Aaron says you have context." Context, not responsibility, not authority. Context. "I do," I said. "From nights, a beat." "Can you jump on?" I thought about the retention agreement sitting unsigned in my inbox. Thought about the repayment clause. Thought about Mark's screenshot. "I can," I said slowly. "But I won't." Silence again. This one heavier. "Why not?" Greg asked. "Because this is what the bonus was for," I replied. "Retention. You made your choice." He exhaled through his nose, annoyed now. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just let the words sit there, clean and undeniable. Greg said, "We'll talk tomorrow," and hung up. That was when the chaos accelerated. By 1:30 a.m., a client-facing status page flipped from green to yellow, then to orange. Someone made the mistake of posting a partial update with the phrase, "investigating internal handoff delays." Internal handoff delays meant people. At 2:04 a.m., Mark called me. Not a message this time. A real call. "Dude," he said the second I answered, voice tight. "They're freaking out. Aaron's asking where you are." I could hear keyboards in the background. Maybe he was back online. Maybe he'd never left. Either way, he sounded small. "I'm not on rotation," I said. "Well, yeah, but you know this stuff better than anyone." There it was. Not gratitude, not apology. Utility. "You got the bonus," I said. This is what it's for." He went quiet. Then, "That's not fair." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was honest. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't my problem anymore. I wrote everything down, I added. Runbooks, edge cases, vendor quirks. It's all there. "Yeah," he said, strained, "but some of it's outdated." I let that land. The silence stretched until he filled it with a softer, more desperate tone. "Look, man, can you just hop on for an hour? I'll owe you." I thought of every time I'd stayed late while he logged off early. Every time he'd summarized my work like it was his own. "I'm done owing," I said, and ended the call. At 2:38 a.m., the status page went red. That was the moment leadership panicked. Not because of money, but because of visibility. Clients noticed red. Executives noticed clients. At 3:11 a.m., Aaron emailed me directly. No CCs, no warmth. "We need you. Name your terms." I read it twice, then a third time, slower. I replied with 3 sentences. "I'm happy to discuss compensation parity, scope clarity, and night's rotation. Until then, I'm not available for emergency coverage. This is not punitive, it's sustainable." I didn't ask, I stated. 5 minutes later, HR joined the thread. 10 minutes after that, legal. They weren't there for me. They were there because someone had finally asked the wrong question. Why one person could bring the system to a halt simply by not showing up. That question doesn't lead to promotions. It leads to audits. By morning, the story inside the company had shifted. Not publicly yet, but internally. Slack messages changed tone. People stopped asking me to help and started asking who approved what, when, and why. Someone noticed that performance ratings for nights were capped. Someone else noticed that retention bonuses weren't documented against criteria. Someone else noticed that Mark had signed his agreement hours before a major incident he couldn't handle. By noon, Greg scheduled a process review. By evening, Aaron stopped responding altogether. And that was when it hit me. Quietly, almost gently. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I had already left the building. But the consequences of how they treated me were just arriving, one by one, with timestamps and paper trails, and people whose job it was to ask uncomfortable questions. The chaos wasn't the outage. The chaos was what came after, when the company had to explain itself without the person who used to clean things up before anyone noticed. By the end of that week, everything slowed down, not in the peaceful way companies promise after transformational change, but in the way a body goes still when it realizes something is broken and can't be ignored anymore. The audit didn't come with flashing lights. It arrived as calendar blocks titled Review and Follow-Up, booked by people who never joined night calls and never asked how outages were fixed. They didn't need explanations. They had timelines, logs, emails, signed agreements with different numbers for the same role. Erin disappeared first. Officially, she was on leave. Unofficially, her name stopped coming up at all, which is how you know a decision's already been made. Mark lasted longer. He tried to step into the vacuum, started posting updates, volunteering for calls, speaking louder in meetings. But the thing about visibility is that it works both ways. When people started asking detailed questions, his answers got thin. He wasn't careless. He just didn't know the system the way he thought he did, and now everyone could see it. HR emailed me midweek, careful wording, no apology. They wanted to close the loop on my employment status. I replied with a clean resignation letter, 2 paragraphs, no accusations, just facts. Last day worked, reason, misalignment of role scope and compensation. Legal signed off within an hour. That told me all I needed to know. They weren't trying to keep me anymore. They were trying to reduce surface area. I handed over access the way I always had, documented, complete, professional. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete files. I didn't get even. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, a recruiter I'd spoken to months earlier followed up. Competitor, similar stack, day coverage, clear on-call rotation. The offer came in with a base increase that made the retention bonus look like a rounding error, and no clauses about paying anything back for leaving. I accepted without negotiating, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to drag the past forward with me. On my last evening before the new job started, I checked the old company's status page out of habit. It was green. Of course it was. Green doesn't mean stable. It just means no one's looking too closely. I heard through a former teammate that the retention program was paused. That's corporate language for someone asked a question that couldn't be answered. The audit report never circulated, but the effects did. Budget controls, approval chains, a new policy about bonus criteria to ensure consistency. Mark stayed the full 12 months. He didn't get another bonus. That was the karma. Quiet. Boring. Exact. As for me, the first time my phone rang at 2 a.m. at the new job, it wasn't an alert. It was a wrong number. I silenced it and went back to sleep without thinking about uptime or queues or whether anyone would notice if I didn't fix something fast enough. Because the truth is, walking out at 3 a.m. wasn't the dramatic part. The dramatic part was realizing I didn't have to prove my value by being exhausted anymore. They paid to keep the wrong person. I just stopped pretending that was my problem.